and welcome to this Astranti video for the top 10 most likely unseen issues for the February 2020 strategic case study exam on coffee pod producer Shinepodd.
So before we start, I'm just going to go through a bit of an introduction to this particular video and where I've got the information on and what you need to do with said information. So how have I come up with these top 10? Well, first of all, you look at the focus in the pre-scene. If there's a lot of material in the pre-scene on a certain topic, then it's likely that there is some kind of importance of that topic. It's likely to be brought up in the exam, so there's more to talk about. And that feeds into the second point here, the degree of importance attached to it by the examiner. But that particular section extends beyond purely what's in the pre-scene, but also what CIMA like to examine. For example, ethics. It may be that there's no real mention of ethics in the case study, but ethics is considered very important by CIMA, and therefore they are likely to examine it. Next is the strategic importance. How important is it to the organization? If a certain topic is very important to the company, for example, say their suppliers, if they rely very heavily on a certain supplier, then it's likely that there might be an issue on the supplier. If something were to happen to that supplier, what impact could that have on the business? And also just a more general experience in doing these videos in creating mock exams and reviewing exams in the past, the typical kind of issues that come up and what kind of things have the examiner brought up in the past. And my final point here is about how easy it is to write issues on that subject. The people who write the exams are obviously people too, and they will go for ones that they know, that they can write good questions on. So what do you need to do for these issues? Well, first of all, it's important to prepare key models. So this will be things like your SWOT exam, like SWOT analysis, like your PESTLE analysis. Because building up this information now will help you to adapt the new information given you in the unseen, or help you to have that context to apply the unseen material. Next thing you need to do is practice exam questions on these issues. This will help you to understand the kind of questions that will be asked around these topics and how to answer them. And also, this next section here, it will help you to plan these answers in your mind so that when you go into the exam and you start writing, you'll already have a background in which to apply this new information. You'll already have certain points to bring up in your head as you're writing for them. And I've also put some more generic things here, such as the advantages and disadvantages of these certain topics, where they would be used and how models can be used to support them. So let's move on to the top 10 issues now.
And the first issue that we are going to look at is that of risk management. And the reason why I've chosen risk management is because it is one of the key P3 topics. It's mostly what is going to be tested with regard to P3 in your exam, and this can include identifying the risks, how you would identify risks, the importance of identifying risks, how you would manage those risks, the various methods you would use to manage them, such as the TARA model, etc. And also risk mapping, where you look at the importance of certain risks, how much of an impact they're going to have on the organization, how likely they are, and that allows you to quantify them, it allows you to triage them and deal with them in order of importance, and therefore you are, in a sense, utilizing resources effectively with regard to risk management. And the importance of having controls in place as well, ensuring these risks don't get out of hand by putting the right controls in place. We know that there are issues at this company. We know that there are things that they need to keep in check. Things like the quality of the coffee. Everything about this organization was about quality, the brand, the reputation, the quality of the beans, the quality of the packaging even of the coffee pods was very, very important. And also cyber risks as well, IT risks. A big part of the new P3 syllabus relates to cyber risks, the importance of having controls in place to prevent hackers, etc. And as a company that sells exclusively online, bar the exception of a few specific boutique outlet shops that are there more for visibility rather than for commercial purposes or retail purposes. Also, because of the fact that they trade online, there's going to be risks of security breaches. Got a lot of customer information, addresses, credit card information, all those sorts of things. So it's very important they keep those in control. There's also an entire section in the pre-scene dedicated to key risks. There were risks about the environment and the impact that the organization was having on the environment. There were risks relating to the economic environment, the commodity prices, the value of the M dollar, etc., as well as IT risks, which we have already mentioned. There was a few other risks that we brought up as well, risks of staffing, the importance of these highly trained, skilled coffee roasters and coffee blenders. Also other risks to commodities as well. This is an organization that trades all over the world, that has to ship things in and out of different places. So of course fuel prices are going to have a big impact on the logistics of the organization as well. And it's a topic that comes up all the time in the case study exam as well. I know this is the very first sitting of the case study exam under the new 2019 syllabus, but as it is mainly a continuation of the same syllabus, just with additions to the actual content, the way in which the exam is being sat, the way in which the pre-scene is presented is no different than the old syllabus. It's just the content that has changed. There's no reasons to think that this will not be the case as well. And in fact, in every single sitting since the case study was introduced in 2015, there have been some questions in some way, shape or form relating to risk management. And so likely issues could be in a specific project. Perhaps they're looking to introduce a new range, or they're looking to acquire a supplier or a competitor, and what kinds of risks may arise as a result of that. The company doesn't have any experience in acquisitions. It's mainly grown through organic growth. Or if they're going into a different market, perhaps they're looking to produce a different kind of coffee or a tea or a hot chocolate type drink. It's not something that we have the skills and experience in, so it would be potentially risky. Or it could also be to do with the controls, perhaps on a particular project or on the organization as a whole. So looking at what the audit committee and the internal audit department should be doing with regards to those risks, because there was an internal audit charter within the pre-scene, but it didn't really talk much about the actual operations, what they were looking for, just more about the admin side of the group. And also it could be about how risks should be managed within the company, and perhaps the importance of installing a culture that's committed to overseeing risks, that's committed to controlling risks, so that these risks are taken care of themselves, because individuals within the organization are spotting issues and that they are dealing with issues. We do have an audit committee, we do have a risk committee, so there should be a lot of resource to help create this culture. So some key points from the pre-scene to bring out here: risk of competition, very competitive market, both in terms of direct competitors, but also with substitutes. You've got ground coffee, coffee beans, coffee shops, instant coffee, etc., all competing for our business. And the reputation, damage to the reputation particularly, could be dramatic for the organization. A key thing to talk about here would be the actor that's been signed up to star in the advert. So Jorge Negrato was several bits in the pre-scene relating to him and relating to the image of him and him being the face of the organization. And so if anything untoward were to happen to him, if he were to defame himself, etc., that could cause a negative backlash on Shinepodd by association. risks over investment as well, not much money available. The actual level of trade payables within the organization was over twice that of the cash that's currently available. And of course, trade payables are things that need to be paid. And there was a real risk that they would have a poor working capital cycle and therefore have to make sure they take steps to ensure they're covered in cases of negative cash flows. So the IT needs of the business with regards to being an online retailer and thinking about data. And a few things here that are quite intertwined. So the changing industry, suppliers and ethics as well. In this type of industry, there's a lot of talk over how the farmers and the growers are treated at the plantations, etc. And that ties in with the ethics. We're a responsible company. We have our third-party code of conduct, contracts, etc. And so it's important that we don't do anything that compromises our ethics, because that in turn would compromise our reputation. But one big risk here is the changing face of the industry. And in developing nations where a lot of coffee is grown, there is a real trend, a real movement towards younger and younger people becoming more and more urbanized. So as these economies grow and the cities develop, a lot of younger people are moving to the cities and taking office-based jobs rather than going and working in agriculture or horticulture. And that, of course, causes problems for these industries, because the average age of a coffee grower in the world is steadily increasing, because the next generation of farmers are not coming in to replace them, and that's causing problems for the industry. In fact, the coffee production has decreased for the third year in a row, and it's set to keep decreasing over the next 30 years. In fact, particularly in countries like Brazil and countries in Asia as well, there's going to be quite substantial percentage decreases over the next couple of decades, up to 60% in some countries. And this, coupled with the fact that the demand for coffee is growing, in fact, has doubled since the 1980s and set to increase yet again and keep increasing, there's going to be a real issue in the future where the production of coffee is just not going to be able to keep up with the demand for it. And that is going to lead to big price increases, etc., which of course would be a big risk to the organization. But one thing that we do have here at Shinepodd that mitigates that is the fact that as we are all about quality, we are able to charge a high price. So we would be able to increase our prices provided that the coffee quality remain the same and without too much of an impact on our customer base, because they are not price conscious, they're not price sensitive to the same extent as someone who is perhaps only using the cheapest possible provider. There's various different theories that you could use. Remember, we've already spoken about the audit committee and the audit committee's role and what they should be doing and what the risk committee should be doing. Also mentioned about risk mapping, where you can associate scores to risks by likelihood and impact, and you can then, in a sense, rank the risks. Ones that have got a huge impact or will cause a huge impact on the organization, have a very high chance of happening, need to be dealt with. Ones that have no impact on the organization and probably won't ever happen are not ones you need to be spending fortunes trying to mitigate against. Also, the TARA model, so your transfer, accept, reduce and avoid. Often when you are faced with a risk, sometimes it's useful to run through that like a checklist and think about how each one could be used to deal with the risk. And also the big one is the COSO risk methodology, and I've got a picture of the COSO risk cube on the screen for you here. But while we're on the subject, and take this through to other subjects and other topics as well, this is a test of your business acumen, this exam. It's not a test of your theoretical knowledge. You were tested on that in P3, E3 and F3. So what I mean by that is, please do not answer a question about risk management, or if it's an add-on issue, which often risk management is, answer it by telling the marker what the COSO risk methodology is, what the COSO cube is, what internal environment is, what objective setting is, what event identification is, what entity level is, what division is, what reporting is, what compliance is, because that is just going to spend waste your entire time. It could take you half an hour to write about that. And you are not going to be asked a question to describe the different parts of the COSO cube. So think of things holistically and think about things strategically. It's the strategic reasons for using risk management tools, not the specific theoretical knowledge of those risk management tools. Why it's important that we have them at the organizations rather than the ins and outs of the models themselves. Next on to issue number 9, which, like risk management, is most likely to be an add-on issue. It comes after a project, perhaps where you have been asked about investing in a certain place, investing in a certain product or project, and then you have to discuss the risks about it, and then you have to discuss how it's going to be financed. And so this is where funding often comes in, like risk management, is it's part of other questions. And it's also part of your role in the role that CIMA has provided for you for the case study, where you are playing the role of a senior manager, that identifying risks and sourcing finance, etc. These two things are part of the ICANN statements that make up the core activities. And like risk management, it's very commonly examined, and cash will be needed to support large projects, and quite a few ones that could potentially arise in this exam. And like P3, the P3 was risk management was the key P3 topic. Funding is one of the key F3 topics, and there's potential here to talk about equity funding, debt funding, and also the cost of capital. So like the issues, again, it's most likely as an add-on issue to an investment issue or a risk management issue or an acquisition issue. So it could also be used to do with long-term requirements. How are we going to fund a whole acquisition of a huge organization, or undertake lots of new projects, or we just need them for our own growth? We're planning on expanding into a couple of new countries, or we could be expanding our supply chain by setting up our own farms, or we're expanding by setting up a factory to produce our own machines rather than licensing them to our strategic partners, etc. All of these will require a huge amount of money. Or it could be for something more short term, such as to do with working capital, and as I already mentioned in the section on risk management, whereas there was potential working capital issues here because the level of trade payables vastly outweighs the level of cash available, and as a result we could end up with a negative working capital cycle, which means that there may not be cash available to pay things that mandatorily have to be paid every month, such as salaries. And I've summarized a few key points from the pre-scene on your screen. So at the 31st of December 2019, the company had $254 million in cash in the bank, but of course most of that, if not all of it, will be needed for working capital, given that the current liabilities already far higher, with trade payables being $593 million. So as previously mentioned, cash flow budgeting is going to be really critical here for those things that cannot go without being paid, such as salaries. And with regards to the long term, the gearing was low to medium, but given that CAFAM's was very, very similar, it would potentially suggest this was perhaps more of an industry standard. And the gearing was at 28.3 or 39.5%, depending on which method you use. So that's long-term debt over equity or long-term debt over long-term debt plus equity. There's not a correct way in a sense. You can use either, but just make sure you're always using the same method. Otherwise, you may skew your analysis. And other thing to mention as well when it comes to raising debt, other than the gearing rate, is also the tangible assets. So over 1.2 billion in assets on the statement of financial position. So that can potentially be used as security to raise that debt. When you are looking at how to fund an organization's projects, then there is a recommended order. So potentially use cash for small projects, very small projects, but again, only if there is cash available. And at the moment, it could be that we don't have too much cash available to use because it might be committed elsewhere. And for larger funding, the next step is to use debt financing through the bank and secured against the asset base, with equity being the very last one due to the cost and time scale of raising funds in this fashion. And there is definitely scope for the company to raise money on the stock market. There is room for increased share capital, and it would be a good investment. The share price has increased recently, and it's a safe bet as well because of the beta, which is less than the industry, and also just because they perhaps would need to raise huge amounts of money to really expand and really change. If they were going to really move into a different direction, such as growing some of their own coffee, it would need more than just buying a factory here or buying a factory there. It would need more wholesale reinvestment in the organization. Of course, that would need a lot of money to be raised. And when talking about debt and equity, a quick way is to just compare the two. For example, debt is much quicker, very easy access to new funds, very low cost as well. But the problem with debt financing is that sometimes it might carry quite high interest rates. We might have quite a lot of finance costs that we have to pay, although our financial cover is quite good at the moment. And with dividends, with equity funding, you don't actually have to pay them. They are optional, unlike interest payments. You don't actually ever have to need to pay the capital back. So for huge amounts of money, sometimes it's best to raise it through equity and through investors. But whichever way you do, whether it's through different banks and different financing institutions or through equity financing, just make sure that you include the position of the lenders and equity providers in your Mendelow's matrix. And this is generally in the high power, low interest category, although potentially equity providers might be key players, particularly if they have put up an awful lot of money and they're relying on a good return from it. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed it, and more importantly, you have found it useful. I'd like to finish by just telling you a few things about the products that we produce here at Astranti and the ones that are part of our course. So these materials can all be purchased as part of the course or purchased individually. So we have our study text. We have 3 study texts for all the objective test exams. So 3 study texts for E1, P1, F2, F3, etc. But we also have the study text specifically for the case study exams, split into 2 parts. The first is about how to approach the exam, how to analyze the information, how to plan your answers, how to write your answers, and also the second part, which looks at the key theories from the objective test levels that are relevant to the particular case study. So if you are looking at P2, F2, E2 for the management exam, F3, P3, E3 for the strategic case study exam, and so on. We have our course videos, which look at how to plan your answers, how to manage your time effectively. These are the key reasons why people fail the exam. We have our pre-scene analysis, which looks at the pre-scene in a lot of depth, applies key information to that, and also concludes with the strategic analysis, where we look at the various different models in the CIMA syllabus and apply them to the case, and also the top 10 most likely issues to arise in your exam. Generally, we have a 70 to 80% accuracy rate on our top 10 issues. Our industry pack, which details in great depth the history and the current contemporary issues within the particular industry that the pre-scene is based on. We also have 20 to 25 industry examples that you can use within your answers. We have mock exams that can be purchased with or without marking and feedback, where you can get some real exam practice in, look for the kinds of things that the examiner is going to bring up in the exam, and also get marking and feedback from expert markers who have marked for CIMA and for us for many years, who know exactly the kinds of things that the examiner is looking for, exactly the kinds of mistakes that students often make, and can provide lots of detailed feedback to ensure that you improve on your performance. We also have our master classes, which are 2 day-long classes which look at all the key issues facing students in the exam. We will also go through live planning, showing you how to plan your answers effectively, how to write your answers effectively. Again, key things that cause people to fail the strategic case study exam, or any of the case study exams for that matter. And also, if you do sign up for our course, provided that you have filled out your forms, provided that you have submitted your mocks, provided you have done everything to show that you have really given it your all to try and pass this exam, we also offer a pass guarantee, giving a free resit to anyone who fails the exam.